My daughter told me the trip was her way of saying sorry. She said she'd been distant, distracted, too caught up in her own life to be a proper daughter. She said she wanted us to reconnect. She said a long weekend at her father-in-law's fishing lodge up near Kenora would be good for both of us. Fresh air, lake of the woods, just the two of us for a few days before her husband joined on Monday. I believed her. That's the part I keep coming back to. I believed her completely. My name is Lawrence. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a building inspector for the city of Thunder Bay, and I retired 4 years ago with a decent pension, a paid-off house on Balmoral Street, and what I thought was a good relationship with my only child. Her name is my daughter. I'll call her that, my daughter, because the name I gave her feels wrong to say now, the way a favorite shirt feels wrong after someone uses it to wipe up a mess. Her husband, I'll call my son-in-law. I want to be honest with you from the start, the way I wish someone had been honest with me years ago when the signs were there, and I was too proud or too tired or too much in love with the idea of my family to read them clearly. My daughter is 41. She's smart. She was always smart. Top of her class at Lakehead, then a decent career in property management in the city. She married my son-in-law about 12 years ago. He's a few years older than her, does something in commercial real estate, drives the kind of truck that costs more than my first house did. I never fully warmed to him. He had a way of making you feel like you were taking up space in a room he owned. But my daughter seemed happy, or I told myself she did, and that was enough for me for a long time. The money problems started about 3 years after they got married. At first it was small things. A loan of $800 because the car needed work. Another $1,200 a few months later, because they'd overextended on a renovation. I gave it freely. They were young, they were building something, that's what fathers do. Then the amounts started climbing. $5,000 because my son-in-law had invested in a buddy's restaurant venture that went sideways. $7,000 because they'd missed a couple of mortgage payments during a rough patch at his company. I gave that too, though I remember standing at the ATM feeling something cold move through me. Not quite doubt, more like the recognition of a pattern I didn't want to name yet. My wife passed away 9 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After she was gone, my daughter was my whole family. She was it. When you only have one person left in your corner, you protect that relationship with everything you have. Maybe too much everything. Over those years, I gave my daughter and her husband somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000. I never wrote it down properly. I wish I had. At the time, every loan felt like an isolated situation, a one-time thing, a crisis that would be the last one. Looking back now, I can see it was a system, a slow, patient system. The last request came 14 months ago, $45,000. My son-in-law called me directly, which was unusual. He said they were in trouble with a private lender, that if they didn't cover the balance by the end of the month, they could lose the house. He laid it out calmly, with numbers and dates, the way a man explains something he's rehearsed. He said he'd already talked to the bank and there were no options. He said he hated asking. He said my daughter didn't even know he was calling. I said I needed to think about it. I talked to my daughter that same evening. She cried. She said they were embarrassed and scared and that she was sorry. She said this would be the last time. She said once they got through this, they were going to sit down and get proper financial advice and turn things around. I gave them the $45,000. It wiped out most of what I'd put aside beyond my pension and the house. But the house was worth something, I told myself. I wasn't destitute, and they were family. 3 weeks later, my daughter called to suggest the fishing trip. She was warm on the phone, warmer than she'd been in a long time. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, and that she wanted to reconnect, just the two of us. She said the lodge was gorgeous, right on the lake, and that it would still be cool enough in October to have the fireplace going at night. She said her husband's father had offered them use of it for the last weekend of the month, and that she'd already cleared it with work. I said yes immediately. I didn't even pause. That's how much I wanted to believe things were getting better. We drove up together in her SUV. It was a Friday afternoon, overcast but dry, the kind of Ontario fall day that smells like wood smoke and wet leaves. We talked the whole drive. She asked about my routines, my neighbor's dog I'd been helping to walk, a book I'd mentioned reading. She was present. She was the daughter I remembered from before things got complicated. The lodge was real. That I'll give them. It was a proper place, a log structure with a porch over the water, a stone fireplace, 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen. No Wi-Fi, but a landline on the wall near the coat hooks. My son-in-law's family had clearly had it for years. There were old fishing photos on the walls, a rack of mismatched rods by the back door, that particular smell of a place that's been loved and used over a long time. We had a good evening. We cooked pasta on the gas stove, opened a bottle of red, sat by the fire. She talked about wanting children, something she'd avoided as a topic for years. I told her about her mother, about the early days when we were young and broke and happy in a small apartment on Court Street. It felt real. It felt like repair. I went to bed around 10. The bedroom had a heavy quilt, a small window facing the lake, a comfortable old mattress. I was asleep within minutes. When I woke up, the fire was out and the lodge was very cold. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the silence. No sounds of movement from the kitchen, no smell of coffee, none of the ordinary sounds of another person in a shared space. I sat up and called her name. Nothing. I swung my legs out of bed, pulled on my trousers and a sweater, and went out to the main room. The fireplace was dark and stone cold, the kind of cold that takes hours to set in. The kitchen was empty. Her overnight bag was gone. The car keys were gone from the hook by the door. I went to the door. It didn't open. I tried again, thinking I'd turned the handle the wrong way in my half-asleep state. I hadn't. The deadbolt had been engaged from the outside. Not the interior latch, the exterior deadbolt, which requires a key. A key I didn't have. I stood there for a moment in the cold kitchen with my hand on a door that wouldn't open, and I felt something I can only describe as a slow, terrible understanding. I went to the window over the kitchen sink. Nailed shut, 2 wood screws driven through the frame at an angle, the kind of thing that takes 30 seconds with a drill and leaves no visible sign from the inside until you actually try to open it. I went to the living room windows. Same thing, the bedroom windows, same. The landline receiver was on its cradle. I picked it up. Dead, not a service outage. The cord had been cut cleanly at the wall junction. I'm a building inspector. Was a building inspector. I know structures. I stood in the middle of that lodge, and I did what I'd trained myself to do for 3 decades. I assessed the situation systematically instead of panicking. Log construction, solid, well-maintained. Interior temperature already down to probably 8 or 9 Celsius and dropping. No fireplace wood inside. The rack was empty. There was a woodshed I'd seen the evening before, about 15 meters from the back door. Outside, inaccessible. Kitchen tap, still running. That was something. I opened every cupboard. Some canned goods, beans, soup, a tin of sardines, a box of crackers, a half-empty bag of coffee. No way to boil water without wood or power. The gas stove. I turned a burner on. It lit. That was heat, at least temporarily, though I knew I couldn't run it continuously and safely in an enclosed space. There was a small propane heater in the closet near the bathroom, the kind people use in ice fishing huts. I found 2 canisters of propane underneath it. I had heat, not much, but heat. I forced myself to sit down and think. She had planned this. Every detail. The timing, the isolation, the cut phone line, the screwed windows, the empty wood rack inside. She hadn't improvised this. She'd prepared it, probably over days. The question was why. I found the answer about 40 minutes later, tucked under the mattress in her bedroom, not mine. She'd put it where I'd eventually have to look. A folded sheet of paper, handwritten in her handwriting. The same handwriting that had signed birthday cards and thank you notes and a letter she'd sent me from university during a hard first semester. I'm not going to reproduce the whole letter. I can't. What I can tell you is what it said in plain terms. It said that my house was worth, at current market, somewhere between $400,000 and $450,000. It said that my pension, combined with my remaining savings, would not cover extended care if my health declined, and that I had expressed to her on multiple occasions that I didn't want to be a burden. It said that my son-in-law had found a lawyer who'd confirmed that with no other living relatives and no updated will, my estate would pass to her automatically. It said that an accident at a remote property, exposure, a fire gone wrong. These things happened to older men who went up to the bush in October. It said she was sorry. It said this was the only way. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the bed very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't quite steady. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because I think precision matters here. I did not feel rage. Rage came later. What I felt first was grief, a clean, quiet grief, the way I'd felt in the hospital 9 years ago, when the doctor's face told me what he hadn't yet said out loud, The loss of something I'd been counting on without knowing I was counting on it. Then I put the letter in the inside pocket of my jacket, and I got to work. I am 67 years old, but I spent 31 years crawling through attics and squeezing through crawl spaces and learning how every type of building is held together and how every type of building can fail. I knew what I was looking at. The log walls were not an option. They were solid and too thick to breach without tools I didn't have. But the interior door to the small storage room near the back had standard residential framing, 2x4s drywall over insulation. I'd seen the exterior wall of that storage area when we arrived. It abutted the woodshed, and it was framed construction, not log. It took me the better part of 3 hours. I used a kitchen knife, a cast iron pan, a fireplace poker I found hanging decoratively above the cold grate, and a level of patience I didn't know I still had. I worked the drywall systematically, score, break, pull, then the insulation, then the sheathing on the exterior side, which was older and softer than I'd hoped. I made a hole roughly 60 centimeters wide and 40 high, low on the wall where the framing allowed. I was 67 years old, and I pushed through a hole in a wall in an empty fishing lodge in the middle of nowhere, and I cried while I was doing it, not from fear, but because of the letter in my pocket and what it meant about the last 12 years. The woodshed was dark and smelled like bark and cold earth. I found a splitting maul, a hatchet, and enough birch to last 3 days. I brought in 4 armloads and got the fire going. Then I sat in front of it and let myself be warm for a few minutes before I thought about what came next. My cell phone had no signal. I'd noticed that the evening before and hadn't thought anything of it. There was no signal anywhere on the property. I'd checked multiple spots. The nearest town was Minaki, roughly 20 minutes by road, and I didn't know the road. What I did know was that we'd passed a resort on the way in, a larger place with a sign advertising year-round cottages, maybe 8 kilometers back the way we'd come. October is slow season, but it was a permanent operation. There was a chance someone was there. I dressed in every layer I could find. My clothes, a pair of wool socks from the lost and found basket by the door, a heavy canvas jacket that had been hanging on a peg, probably my son-in-law's from the fit of it. I took the splitting maul, not for protection, because I didn't know the road, and the morning was dark, and a splitting maul is a useful thing to have in the bush. I walked for just under 2 hours. The manager at the resort was a man in his late 50s who was winterizing the docks when I came out of the tree line. He looked at me the way you'd look at anyone who appeared from the woods at 8:30 in the morning, cold and clearly distressed. I said I needed to call the police. He took me inside and gave me coffee and handed me a phone. The OPP, Ontario Provincial Police, were there within 40 minutes. 2 officers, professional and thorough. I gave them the letter. I walked them through everything. They took photographs and measurements, and the letter went into an evidence bag. My daughter was stopped at the junction of Highway 17 and Riverton Road, still in Ontario, still 4 hours from Thunder Bay. She'd apparently spent the night at a motel in Dryden. My son-in-law was taken into custody at their home in Thunder Bay the following morning. What followed was 8 months of legal proceedings that I am not going to detail here because they belong to the court and not to this story. What I will tell you is the outcome. My son-in-law pleaded guilty to criminal conspiracy. My daughter was convicted of forcible confinement and criminal negligence causing bodily harm. I developed mild frostbite on 2 toes before I got the fire going. She received 4 years. He received 2 years less a day, served in a provincial facility. Their property was subject to civil proceedings related to the money I could document having transferred over the years. I recovered approximately $31,000 through the civil judgment. Not everything, but something. I updated my will the week after I got home from the hospital. I have a lawyer now, a good one in Thunder Bay, a woman who was thorough and direct and who did not flinch when I explained the situation. My estate goes to 2 charities, one that supports palliative care because of what my wife went through, and one that works with seniors experiencing financial abuse because of what I went through. My house is still on Balmoral Street. I still walk my neighbor's dog on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I still read probably more than before. I am, in the plain sense of the word, fine. People ask me sometimes if I miss her, if I miss my daughter. I have thought about how to answer that honestly. I miss who I thought she was. I miss the person I was building a relationship with for 41 years. The little girl who used to follow me around while I fixed things around the house, who called me at midnight from university that first semester because she was scared, and homesick, who stood next to me at her mother's funeral and held my hand without saying anything because she knew there was nothing to say. That person I grieve. I will probably grieve her for the rest of my life. The person who screwed those windows shut and cut the phone line and folded that letter and slid it under a mattress. I don't know who that is. I don't think I ever did. I am 67 years old, and I have learned, later than I should have, that love is not the same thing as evidence. I loved my daughter. That was real. But love is not proof of someone's character. It is not a guarantee of safety. It is not a reason to ignore every pattern a person shows you over years and years of showing you exactly who they are. The fire in my living room on Balmoral Street is not a stone fireplace by a lake. It is a gas insert, quiet and reliable, and I turn it on when the Thunder Bay winters get serious, and I sit in my chair with my book and my coffee and my neighbor's dog, who stays sometimes when she's working late, and I remind myself that warmth is not something anyone can lock you out of permanently. Not if you're willing to knock a hole in the wall to get to it.